The wind howls through the darkened streets as rain pounds against the cracked pavement. A woman stands at the door of her small apartment, gripping a worn-out eviction notice with trembling hands. Her name is Angela Carter, a single mother, a fighter, a woman who has done everything right, yet finds herself moments away from losing everything. Angela whispers, voice breaking, This can't be happening." Her young daughter Maya clutches her side, wide-eyed and frightened. The landlord, Mr. Reynolds, a cold-faced man in an expensive coat, towers over them, tapping his foot impatiently. "You had your warnings, Angela. No rent, no home. It's that simple." Angela's eyes plead for mercy, but Reynolds only scoffs, tossing a final glance at the few belongings scattered in boxes. With one swift motion, he signals to the movers behind him. They step forward, grabbing her things as Maya lets out a terrified cry. Maya, crying, "Mommy, please, where will we go?" Angela swallows the lump in her throat, her mind racing. Outside, the storm rages. Inside, her world crumbles. She's about to lose everything. But fate has a way of turning tables. And soon, Mr. Reynolds will learn what it means to have nothing. The morning sun casts a warm glow over the modest neighborhood where Angela Carter has built a life. The apartment complex isn't the most luxurious, but it's home, at least it was. The sound of children playing drifts through the air, mixing with the distant hum of city traffic. Inside apartment 3B, Angela stands at the kitchen counter, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, her mind burdened with worries she's too exhausted to voice. Angela Carter is the kind of woman you root for, a single mother, working 2 jobs, to keep a roof over her daughter's head. She's resilient, intelligent, and fiercely protective of Maya. For years, she's balanced the impossible. Morning shifts at a diner, night shifts cleaning offices, just to make ends meet. And despite the struggle, she never lets Maya feel the weight of their hardship. Maya, just 7 years old, is the light in Angela's life, a bright-eyed, curious child who dreams of becoming a teacher. She doesn't fully understand the world, yet, but she sees how hard her mother works. She sees the tired eyes, the aching hands, and the silent prayers whispered over unpaid bills. But things have been getting harder. Angela lost one of her jobs 2 months ago when the diner cut staff. She's been scraping by, selling old furniture, cutting meals down to 1 a day, doing everything she can, but it's not enough. And Mr. Reynolds, her landlord, isn't the type to show mercy. Angela sits across from Mr. Reynolds, clutching an envelope, half of the rent, all she could gather. He leans back in his leather chair, flipping through documents without looking at her. Angela, "Please, Mr. Reynolds, I just need a little more time. I have a job interview lined up. If I get it, I can catch up on payments." Mr. Reynolds scoffs. "I've heard that before. You think I run a charity? Rent's due on time or you're out." He pushes the envelope back across the desk, uninterested. Angela, pleading, "I have a child." Mr. Reynolds, "Not my problem." He stands, walking toward the window, staring down at the city like a king surveying his kingdom. Angela clenches her fists, holding back the frustration rising in her chest. "Mr. Reynolds," without turning, "you have 7 days. After that, you and your kid better find somewhere else." Angela leaves the office with a sinking heart, knowing her world is on the verge of collapse. Back to present. Apartment 3B. Angela shakes herself from the memory, turning to see Maya drawing at the table, oblivious to the eviction looming over them. The apartment is small but filled with love. Maya's school projects taped to the walls, a bookshelf stacked with library books, and a tiny kitchen where Angela makes their favorite meals when she can afford them. But now, their home is a ticking clock, counting down to the moment they lose it all. Angela takes a deep breath, pulling out her phone. She's spent the last week searching for jobs, but rejection after rejection has left her with few options. She glances at the unpaid bills on the table, a mountain of stress threatening to break her. She won't let it. She refuses to. For Maya's sake, she'll find a way. But time is running out. And Mr. Reynolds? He's waiting for the moment. She falls. Little does he know, life has a way of turning fortunes upside down, sometimes faster than you can imagine. The sound of heavy boots echoes through the hallway as Mr. Reynolds strides toward apartment 3B. His usual smug expression is laced with impatience. Behind him, two movers carry empty boxes, ready to strip the apartment bare. Today is the day. Angela Carter and her daughter will be thrown out onto the streets. Angela frantically folds clothes into a duffel bag, her fingers trembling. She hasn't found a place to go. The shelter she called last night is full. Her best friend Tanya offered a couch, but Tanya already has 3 kids and barely enough space. She can't put that burden on her. Maya sits on the floor, hugging her stuffed bunny, confused but silent. She's old enough to know something is wrong. Then, a knock at the door, a sharp, commanding knock. Angela freezes. She already knows who it is. Mr. Reynolds, muffled, through the door. Angela, time's up. Open up or I'll have my guys do it for you. Angela closes her eyes, takes a deep breath, and pulls the door open. Angela. Mr. Reynolds, please. Just a few more days, Mr. Reynolds, cutting her off. Not this again. You had more than enough time. The law's on my side, Angela. Now get your things and go. The movers push past her, heading for the living room. Angela steps forward, trying to block them. Angela, desperate. Wait, please, I have an interview today. If I get the job, I'll pay everything I owe. Mr. Reynolds laughs, a dry, hollow sound. Mr. Reynolds. You people always have a story, a job interview, a sick relative, some tragic excuse. But I don't run on sympathy, Angela. I run on money. And you don't have any. Angela's hands clench into fists. Maya lets out a small whimper from the corner, and Angela's heart aches. Angela, softly but firmly. We're not you people. We're human beings. And you're throwing a mother and child out with nowhere to go. Mr. Reynolds, shrugging. Not my problem. He signals to the movers. They start grabbing furniture, Maya's bed, the kitchen table, the few things they own. Angela's face twists with helplessness, anger, and humiliation. Angela wants to fight. She wants to scream, to shove them out, to make them see her pain. But she has no power here. And so, minutes later, she and Maya stand outside in the cold, watching their belongings tossed onto the sidewalk. The rain begins to drizzle, soaking through their thin jackets. Angela pulls Maya close, shielding her as best she can. Mr. Reynolds steps out, lighting a cigarette, surveying the eviction like it's nothing more than business. Mr. Reynolds. You should have planned better. Angela doesn't respond. She won't give him the satisfaction, but something shifts inside her. A fire. She won't forget this, and neither will he. Weeks pass. The winter air grows colder. The holidays approach, but for Angela and Maya there is no celebration. Only survival. Tanya took them in for a short time, but Angela didn't want to overstay her welcome. She found temporary housing at a shelter, but the wait list for permanent housing is long. But something interesting starts happening. Mr. Reynolds' luck begins to turn sour. It starts small, tenants missing payments, unexpected repairs draining his savings. Then a pipe bursts in one of his buildings, flooding the entire first floor. Insurance won't cover it. He scrambles to come up with the money, but it's not enough, and then he gets sued. A former tenant files a complaint, exposing his illegal eviction practices. Soon, more tenants come forward with similar stories. The city launches an investigation. His reputation crumbles. Investors pull out. Tenants stop paying rent, knowing he has no legal standing. And then, the final blow. His own bank forecloses on his properties. Mr. Reynolds, the once untouchable landlord, now finds himself evicted from the very apartments he used to control. And for the first time in his life, he feels something he never cared about before. Late one night, he wanders the streets, his expensive coat now dirty and torn. His stomach growls. He reaches into his pocket, pulling out a few crumpled bills. Not enough for a motel. Not even enough for a decent meal. He never thought he'd end up here. And yet, here he is, cold, hungry, alone. He looks up and through the falling snow, he sees a familiar face, Angela. She's walking out of a diner, a small bag of food in her hands. She spots him and freezes. For a long moment, they just stare at each other. Then, Angela steps forward. And what she does next changes everything. The city is blanketed in a thick layer of snow, the cold air sharp and unforgiving. Streetlights cast a dim glow over the sidewalk, where pedestrians rush past, bundled in coats and scarves. But one man, huddled against the side of a closed storefront, remains still. Mr. Reynolds clutches his thin jacket around himself, his breath visible in the icy air. His once pristine shoes are now scuffed and soaked through. His hands tremble, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion, hunger, and the crushing weight of his downfall. His world has collapsed around him. His bank accounts are empty. His properties are gone. The power he wielded, reduced to nothing. And now, for the first time in his life, he knows what it feels like to be discarded, to be homeless. The door to a small diner swings open, and warm light spills onto the street. The scent of fresh bread and hot coffee drifts into the air. Angela steps out carrying a takeout bag in one hand, bundled up against the cold. She takes a few steps before she sees him. Mr. Reynolds. She freezes. For a long moment, they simply stare at each other. The man who destroyed her world now sitting in the very position he forced her into. Angela's first instinct is to walk away. After everything he put her through, after the fear, the humiliation, the cold nights with nowhere to go, why should she help him? But then, she hears Maya's voice in her head. We're not you. People. We're human beings. Angela closes her eyes, takes a deep breath, and exhales. Then, she steps forward. Angela, softly. Mr. Reynolds? His head jerks up, eyes wide with shame. He tries to look away, but there's nowhere to hide. Mr. Reynolds, hoarse, barely a whisper. Angela. She kneels in front of him, searching his face. He looks so different now, tired, broken, afraid. It's a look she knows all too well. Angela. How long have you been out here? Reynolds swallows hard, his pride warring with his desperation. He wants to lie, to brush it off, to pretend he still has some control. But the truth is, he has nothing left to lose. Mr. Reynolds, voice cracking. 3 weeks. Angela exhales, shaking her head. 3 weeks. The same amount of time she and Maya were homeless because of him. She should hate him, she should walk away. But instead, she reaches into the takeout bag and hands him a sandwich. Mr. Reynolds stares at it, his pride screaming at him not to take it, but hunger is louder. With trembling hands, he accepts it. The warmth of the bread against his frozen fingers nearly makes him choke. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. Angela watches as he devours the food, each bite slower than the last, as if reality is finally sinking in. He wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, then hesitates before looking up at her. And for the first time since she's known him, he looks truly ashamed. Mr. Reynolds, whispering, I was wrong. Angela doesn't speak. She lets him sit with it, lets him truly feel the weight of his own actions. She can see it in his eyes, the understanding, the regret, the pain of knowing he destroyed himself. Mr. Reynolds, softly, shaking his head. I thought I was better. I thought money made me untouchable, but I see it now. I see what I did to you, to Maya, to all of them. He gestures vaguely to the city, to the thousands of people just like Angela, people he'd thrown out without a second thought. Mr. Reynolds, breaking down. I was cruel, and now I finally understand what it feels like. Angela watches. Him, her heart pounding. She never expected this, not from him. Mr. Reynolds, I don't deserve your kindness. Angela, no, you don't. Silence. And then, Angela extends a hand. Mr. Reynolds stares at it, eyes wide with disbelief. Reynolds, moi. Angela exhales, her breath visible in the cold air. Angela, because someone has to break the cycle. He hesitates. Then, slowly, shakily, he takes her hand. The turning point. Angela takes him to a shelter, the same one that helped her when she had nowhere to go. The irony isn't lost on either of them. She doesn't do it for revenge. She doesn't do it for validation. She does it because she refuses to be like him. She refuses to be someone who looks away. And as Mr. Reynolds sits in the shelter that night surrounded by people he once saw as beneath him, he finally understands. Money doesn't make you powerful. Status doesn't make you untouchable. At the end of the day, we all need each other. Days pass. The snow has finally stopped falling, but the city remains cold, colder than it has ever felt before for someone like Mr. Reynolds. He wakes up in a small cot at the shelter, his face still red and raw from the bitter nights spent on the streets. He stares up at the low ceiling, trying to comprehend everything that has happened. He had a life built on power, wealth, and control. But all of that is gone now, stripped away in the blink of an eye. And for the first time in years, he feels the humbling sting of vulnerability. No one is looking out for him. No one is coming to save him. The weight of his actions presses down on him, suffocating him with guilt. Mr. Reynolds spends the next few days at the shelter in a haze, moving from one task to the next. But his mind never fully leaves the day Angela showed him mercy. He thought he had seen it all. Threats, intimidation, deals brokered in boardrooms, but this was different. This was humanity. And it makes him sick. The same woman he had thrown out, the same woman he had ignored and belittled, had shown him something he had never once considered. Compassion. But the question gnaws at him. Why? Why would she help someone like him, someone who had caused her so much pain? Mr. Reynolds sits in the common area, looking at the people around him, men and women who, like him, have nowhere to go. He notices an older man with a scruffy beard, his hands shaking as he sips a cup of coffee. A young woman sits nearby, holding her baby close to her chest. They all have their stories, their reasons for being here, but in this moment they are simply people. No labels, no titles, no judgments, just people. He catches a glimpse of Angela, who is helping at the front desk, speaking with a volunteer. She's the same woman who sat across from him just days ago, offering him food when he had nothing. And in that moment, he makes a decision. He will never forget the way she looked at him, the way she extended her hand, despite everything he had done to her. He doesn't know what comes next, but he knows he has to make things right. He has to start somewhere. Angela is walking home from the shelter. Maya's hand is in hers, and there's a slight skip in Maya's step as they make their way up the sidewalk. It's a crisp afternoon, and the air smells of fresh earth, something in the air that hints at a new beginning. As they approach the apartment complex, Angela freezes. In front of her door stands a figure, a familiar figure. Angela's breath catches. Her first instinct is to turn around and leave, but she stands still watching him. He's wearing a coat, new, sharp, and uncomfortably expensive. His hair is neatly combed, and his face, though still marked by the signs of his time on the streets, holds a semblance of pride. Mr. Reynolds, softly. Angela. Angela's heart races. She doesn't know if she's ready for whatever this moment might bring. She doesn't know if she wants to hear his apology or listen to him try to explain away everything he's done. Angela, quietly. What are you doing here? He hesitates. For the first time, Angela sees him struggle to find the right words, the right way to explain himself. Mr. Reynolds. I came to say thank you. Angela raises an eyebrow, confused. No, that's not enough. I've done a lot of things in my life that I can't take back. But what I can do, what I can start doing, is make things right. He reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a checkbook. He hands it to Angela, written for the full amount of the back rent she owed. This is for you and Maya. I've paid the back rent, all of it. Angela stares at the check, stunned. Her fingers hover over the paper, unsure whether to take it. She never expected him to go this far. Her mind races, trying to understand the shift that has taken place within him. The arrogance she once saw in him is now replaced with something that looks like humility. Angela, finally cautiously. Why? Mr. Reynolds doesn't look away this time. He holds her gaze with an intensity that surprises her. Mr. Reynolds, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve your kindness, but I want to try. I want to do better, to fix the damage I caused even if I can't undo everything. I've started working with the Tenants' Rights Group. I've pledged to donate part of my profits to shelters and programs that help people in situations like yours. I know it's not enough, but it's a start. I want to be a better man, a better person. Angela watches him, the weight of his words sinking in. The check in her hand feels like a symbol of change, a moment where everything could be different. She looks at Maya, who's standing quietly by her side watching the interaction. Angela kneels to her daughter's level, a soft smile breaking through her anxiety. Angela, whispering to Maya, sometimes people surprise you. Maya nods, though she doesn't fully understand yet. But one day, she will. Angela stands up, holding the check in her hand, still unsure how to proceed. And then, for the first time in a long time, she chooses forgiveness. Angela, thank you. Mr. Reynolds nods, a quiet sigh of relief escaping him. Mr. Reynolds, I don't deserve it, but thank you. He turns to leave, but before he walks away, he pauses, turning back to Angela. Mr. Reynolds, softly. You were right. We're all just people, and I'm sorry I ever forgot that. He walks away, leaving Angela and Maya standing in the doorway, their future no longer defined by fear but by the possibility of a fresh start. The story of Angela, Mr. Reynolds, and their intertwined fates serves as a powerful lens through which to examine some of the most pressing social issues that continue to shape our world. Systemic inequality, the dehumanization of marginalized communities, and the potential for personal transformation. While their story is centered around one man's downfall and one woman's act of compassion, it speaks to a larger societal problem. A problem rooted in centuries of historical injustice, economic exploitation, and a systemic structure that continues to disadvantage people based on race, class, and economic status. In the real world, the issues raised in this narrative are not isolated or unique to any single person. They are embedded in the fabric of societies everywhere, from small towns to bustling cities. The core conflict, the stark division between the powerful and the powerless, is a direct result of a complex web of societal systems designed to perpetuate inequality. Systemic inequality and the divide between the haves and the have-nots. At the heart of Mr. Reynolds' fall from grace is a structural inequality that has always existed in societies, particularly in capitalist economies. People like him, the wealthy landowners, the business tycoons, the corporate elites, are rarely ever truly touched by the struggles faced by those without resources. For decades, the most privileged in society have been able to create and enforce systems that ensure their wealth and power remain intact, often at the expense of the less fortunate. In Reynolds' case, this was done through discriminatory housing practices, neglecting the humanity of tenants, and disregarding the fact that those he rented to were not just numbers on a ledger, but people with lives and needs. But what happens when the system flips? When the man who once held power becomes the one who is left behind? Mr. Reynolds' experience, his sudden fall from a position of wealth and control, shines a light on a reality that many fail to see. The illusion of power and control in a system built on exploitation can evaporate in an instant. He may have once been able to turn a blind eye to the lives of those beneath him, but the moment he found himself at the mercy of the very system he helped uphold, he became just another cog in the machine. This story reflects a larger societal truth. Those who profit from others' labor, from the control of housing or resources, are often blind to the very structures that sustain their own position. It is easy for the powerful to dismiss those in lower social strata until the same mechanisms of society that uplift them turn on them. The disconnect between wealth and poverty is not just about material possessions, it's about humanity itself. The rich often see the poor as a collective mass, as statistics or issues to be solved, but the poor are individuals, real people with stories, struggles, and aspirations. The moment Mr. Reynolds loses his wealth and privilege, he is forced to face the humanity of those he once saw as beneath him. The role of compassion and personal responsibility. One of the most striking themes in this narrative is the role of compassion and personal responsibility. Angela, in her decision to help Mr. Reynolds, embodies the very essence of human decency. Despite everything she's endured, the trauma, the injustice, the betrayal, she chooses to show compassion rather than seek revenge. This decision speaks volumes about the power of forgiveness, empathy, and understanding. Angela's action reflects an ideal that is all too often lost in a society that celebrates individual success at the expense of communal well-being. In a world where we are often told to look out for ourselves first and to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, Angela's choice is a reminder that true strength lies in lifting others up, even those who may not seem to deserve it. The moment Mr. Reynolds accepts Angela's help and begins his own journey toward personal redemption is one of profound significance. It speaks to the possibility of change, that no one is beyond saving, and no one is so entrenched in their ways that they cannot evolve. While systemic inequalities may be difficult to dismantle entirely, individual actions can create ripples of change, challenging the status quo and opening the door for new possibilities. The process of redemption is difficult, but it's also necessary. Mr. Reynolds, in his act of reaching out and apologizing, acknowledges the damage he caused, both to Angela and to the community at large. Taking responsibility for one's actions, especially when they've harmed others, is the first step toward making things right. It is a necessary step if we as individuals and as a society are to ever achieve true justice. The scene is quiet now. Angela stands in the doorway, the weight of everything that has happened settling into her chest. She looks out at the world beyond, no longer just an observer, but a participant in change. The camera lingers on her face, showing both the softness of her forgiveness and the strength of her resolve. The story of Angela and Mr. Reynolds is more than just a tale of individual redemption. It's a reflection of the world we all live in, a world marked by complexity, division, and, above all, possibility. We've witnessed how a system built on power and privilege can tear people down. We've seen how a person's life can be upended in an instant, how the wealthy and the powerful can fall just as hard as those they've trampled. But we've also seen something far more powerful: the choice to change, the courage to take responsibility, and the transformative force of compassion. What if we all made that choice? What if we chose to see one another as humans first, beyond race, beyond status, beyond wealth or circumstance? What if we allowed compassion rather than judgment to guide our actions? The truth is, the journey toward justice, equality, and kindness begins with us, all of us. It begins when we acknowledge the systems that divide us, the forces that perpetuate injustice, and the ways we can challenge them. It begins when we look within ourselves and ask, how can I contribute to the change I want to see in the world? And change is possible. It might not come overnight, but every act of kindness, every choice to do better, adds up. It's in the small moments: the hand offered to a stranger, the voice raised in support of a cause, the apology that bridges a divide. These actions ripple outward, creating a wave of transformation that can shift the very fabric of our society. So, what can we do? How can we take the lessons from Angela's compassion and Mr. Reynolds' transformation and apply them to the world around us? We can speak up when we see injustice, whether it's in our workplaces, our schools, or in the streets. We can raise our voices against systems that perpetuate inequality, even when it's uncomfortable. We can show compassion in our daily interactions, remembering that everyone has a story, and that kindness has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. We can support policies that fight for housing equity, criminal justice reform, and fair wages. We can vote for leaders who stand for justice, not just for the wealthy, but for the people who need it most. We can learn and grow, challenging, ourselves to understand the perspectives of others, especially those whose experiences may be different from our own. The work ahead is daunting, yes. But if we can learn anything from Angela's journey, it's that individual actions matter. They don't have to be grand or perfect, but when they come from a place of truth and empathy, they have the power to spark real change. Your actions, no matter how small they seem, matter. I want you to ask yourself today, what can I do? How can I show up for the world? How can I contribute to the change that needs to happen? Let's start by sharing this story. Let's spread the message of compassion and justice, of accountability and forgiveness, and of the idea that every one of us has the potential to do better. It's time to lift each other up. It's time to ensure that no one is left behind. We are all in this together. Take a moment to reflect, then share your thoughts with us. How has this story impacted you? What actions are you willing to take in your own life to help make this world a better, kinder place for everyone? Because the road to justice doesn't start tomorrow, it starts today, and it starts with us.